Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about
circles of connection and care, which may sound like kind of an abstract or abstruse topic, but it's something I think a lot of people can easily relate to. Would you agree about that?
Yeah, it's not a hard concept to understand, and it's, in a plethora of different philosophical traditions, so there's a good chance that you've experienced it at some point, sometime in your life.
Yeah, and what else is kind of cool about this is it's a way of thinking about things that you could actually visualize. So if you imagine to yourself a set of concentric circles, you could put whatever you want. It could be like the skee ball at the Chuck E. Cheese, right? The thing that we drop those balls into. Well, those are concentric circles. Or it could be anything else that you like that has some small circle in the beginning or in the middle, right? And then
the solar system.
Yeah, that works. Or a target, right? All of these are good visual analogies to it. So what's the basic idea here in talking about these circles?
So, the basic thing is that we grow up and we already have a natural affinity for, ourselves and our parents and, sometimes our siblings.
That changes over time, yeah.
Right. But, for most of us, we have this very deep ingrained care that we have for those people that are closest to us. And then we have certain levels of lesser care, but you still appropriate or take into consideration how your actions are going to reflect upon other groups that you're a part of. So, for example, your greater family, maybe your neighborhood, your city, your state, country, or potentially even the world or the universe.
Yeah, and sometimes these are, you might say, purely imaginary for a person. I've known some people, at least in the Chicagoland area, who have said that they've never actually gone outside of the Chicago suburbs, which was a little mind-blowing for me to find out that was the case. But they swore that was the situation. So their connection to, say, Americans as a whole, they could see it on TV or on the internet, but it would have to be kind of imaginary. And I think when it comes to thinking about the world as such, there's no way we can experience the world as a totality. So we might know people in foreign countries far away from us. I routinely correspond with people literally on the other side of the world through Zoom as clients, but we can't visualize that circle except in our imagination. And so these circles, we learn about them, you might say, developmentally, right? We start out as kids, we know our family unit, maybe we see kids on the playground, we get introduced to school, and then we take social studies classes and they teach us about other places, and hopefully we get some geography, although I don't really know how effective the geography teaching is today, going by what my students seem to know about where things are, and my kids too, I have to admit as well. But so when we learn these, you could call them, circles, or we can think of them as in other ways as well. What's the really key takeaway from this? You mentioned affinity or affection, or maybe I missed the term. We've talked here about
appropriation.
Oh, right, yeah. And then we can talk about care and concern. Are we the kind of creatures that naturally only care about people who are close to us in proximity?
I'd say whoever we consider an in-group, and
that's a good, yeah.
And so that can change depending on if you're a religion. If you are part of a religion, then you're usually the people that ascribe to at least your denomination, whatever happens to might be. You usually consider those people your in groups. Hey, if you're a Packer fan, you've got an in group.
That's an interesting one, because have you ever looked at those maps that they did using Facebook of counties and people's fan affiliation? It was very predictable. Like if you're in the Chicagoland area, Bears fans, right? Mm-hmm. If you're out in Philly, well, Eagles fans. Pretty much all of New England is Pats fans.
Patriots,
yeah. But there's little like sprinklings all over the place, and there were two teams that had a lot of counties in weird places that were the majority, not necessarily the majority, but the largest number of people in that county belonged to that fandom, and it was the Packers. And can you guess who the other one was?
Cowboys?
No, although that would make perfect sense like 20 years ago. Steelers.
Yeah. Really? Oh,
weirdly enough,
Yeah.
But that you're onto something there, because I've experienced this. When I was living out in New York, you could find places that were Packers bars just about anywhere. My wife went to the one in New York City called Kettle of Fish, where it's literally a basement bar, and you go downstairs and they're serving, summer sausage and various Wisconsin beers and lots of cheese. And she said that when you go in, people are talking in their, fairly hoity-toity New York accents, but they're all transplants. And within 20 minutes, they're talking like us. Only maybe even a little bit more Wisconsin-y. And we went to a Packers bar in Boston, and it was quite interesting. It was pretty packed. Everyone was there in Packers gear, and we were watching it. And so we had some sort of commonality. Let's bring this back to philosophy rather than just talking about sports. What's going on there? You are sharing in some sort of common experience, and you have some views and some commitments that you also share in common. And then you can look at the other person, and even though you don't know them from Adam, you might buy them a beer, or right. Give them 5 when something good happens, or and look at them as if they matter, as if they are somebody who you care about.
This is I think it's been recalled other things from other people, but I like the way that Yuval Noah Harari refers to this concept as an intersubjective reality. And so it's a thing that affects reality just as much as an objective thing does, even though it only exists because we subjectively all agree upon it. So another example is money has value only because we agree upon it. Corporations are only entities because we agree that they are. There's no body of a company unless you consider the body the charter. But you could rip the charter and that still would, be able to maintain and hold property.
Yeah, I like that idea. And it even works when there's opposition. Like you can be from an area and be, like when you're, say, 18, 19, 20, and you're like, this place is terrible. I can't wait to get the hell out of here and get to some cool place, right? But you're still from that place. You're still marked as belonging to that intersubjective community. And then, 20 years later, you can be like, man, it was so great back there. I think I'll move back there.
And one that I found was really encouraging was I used to ride a motorcycle a lot more, and to, especially if you ride a cruiser, you go down the road and there's the thing called the high sign that you flash to every other biker that you go down. It's kind of like hey, I'm in the group, you're in the group, yeah, we're in the group.
Interesting. I don't really know much about that. So does that work? Is it something that's like universally acknowledged, or?
It is. At least in the United States, and of the subset of motorcyclists that are either touring or have cruisers, so your Harley Davidson type, black and chrome type thing, and the high sign is like this, and you hold it, I guess, on the left side, down by your thigh, and that's just like I'm doing it wrong. It's this.
Well, they can't. Nobody can see it on the radio anyway, so.
Whatever. But for those people that might actually see this video recording, And but yeah, it's a a sign of solidarity. It's and then if you're like out, I went out to Sturgis one year and enjoyed that atmosphere, and I pulled into a campground, and it was totally filled up, and I just kind of like went around, just like spotted someone that kind of looked like he had a bike kind of near me, and I went over to him and said like similar to mine, and say, hey, like it's all filled up, do you mind to throw my tent up here, I'll be out right quick in the morning. It's like, yeah, whatever, no problem. It was like, whatever, that was great. And it was like they had no reason to care about me besides the fact that we had both shared in this particular semi-dangerous hobby.
Yeah, and to use some other terms that we're going to employ to discuss this as we look at some classic interpretations of this, he exerted benevolence towards you, right? There's no need for him. He doesn't know you, again, like I said, from Adam, and there's no like laws or rules that say, oh, you have to welcome the person who's got a motorcycle and wants to camp next to you. He did something nice for you. He treated you as somebody who was worth having a connection to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about one of the early treatments of this, and I picked out Cicero, the great Roman orator and lawyer as well, and statesman, but also a philosopher. And in his book on duties, which he wrote to his son to try to give his son some idea about how he should think about behavior, and then how he ought to regulate his behavior, he talks about justice. And for the Stoics, who Cicero was drawing on, justice didn't just include following the rules and keeping your commitments and fulfilling duties and giving everybody what they ought to have. It goes further than that. It includes benevolence. You ought to try to exhibit kindness to people when you can. And Cicero doesn't say you need to be kind to everybody. As a matter of fact, he's got some strictures about that. Don't be so kind that you wind up being destitute. But he does talk about this metaphor of circles. And he says that the closest circle is the one that we know the most. Our friends, our family, those who are very close to us. And then we have those who live in the same neighborhood. So like you and I both being fellow Milwaukeeans, I guess you could say, would be within that circle, right? And then
I'll walk with you on that one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we are both in the... It's a bit of a bigger town, I think, than Cicero may have had in mind.
Yeah.
But so maybe we have to talk about neighborhoods then instead, right?
Yeah.
So you're in Riverwest, I'm down here in West Town. So then maybe we have a larger one, which then is the greater community. And at a certain point, Cicero talks about what he calls the political community, or in his view, the Roman, at that time, Roman Republic, soon to become an empire within his lifetime as Caesar manages to take over, Cicero being on the wrong side of everything while that happens. And so Cicero also then extends it out to the world, and he says, we can think about humanity as one gigantic circle. Now, Cicero's treatment prioritizes the nation or the political community over the world. And he says that's actually the most important one. He also thinks that the friends and family one is really important. So, neighbors, you should be good to them. You should connect with them in some way. But in a certain respect, it's more important to see them as fellow citizens than anything else.
And it seems to get at this kind of idea of either, the clash between loyalty and, I guess, morality in a more absolute sense.
Yeah, that's true.
Is morality just dependent upon those people that are closest to us? And can we, say, oh, well, they're far away, and thus morality doesn't extend to them? And how I act with them.
About them. I mean, Cicero's kind of a stickler for that. He even thinks that we owe enemies in wartime certain duties. And, I guess in a way to be at war with somebody is to push them out of the circle. to say,
Mm.
I'm not going to treat you with the same sort of care as I would other people. As a matter of fact, if I get a chance, I'm going to kill you or
Mm-hmm.
maim you or whatever else, shun you in some way. So I think that at least with Cicero himself, there's a recognition of the humanity, even of the enemy. But it's a pretty limited recognition. I mean, you're still going to try to kill him, you know. If you take him prisoner, you can't do anything whatsoever you like to him, as opposed to other ancient treatments of prisoners. But, and he also thinks you shouldn't lie to your enemies, which is a kind of a weird thing we might explore in some other discussion.
Who was the Roman general who returned to Carthage after he was captured?
Oh, yeah. I don't remember because he'd given his word, right?
You're right. He
And
gave his
everyone
word
else,
that he.
yeah, and everyone else is
Yeah.
like, "What are you doing? This is insane." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, someone's got standards apparently.
But there's something behind that. There's the recognition that, and this gets to the heart of it. This recognition that these wider circles include other people who we ought to be willing to extend the same sort of kindnesses, the same sort of respect, the same sort of duties as we would to those who we know that we should because we're closer to them. And you brought up this term loyalty as being something that could be in conflict. And I think that that's quite true. We often do experience this sense that, well, we ought to be treating other people better than we do, or paying attention to them or taking them into account. But we feel a greater loyalty to those who are close to us. We feel a greater affinity. There's almost like a natural basis for that, I think the ancients thought. So this is a great jumping off point into how do we get beyond that. And the Stoics had quite a few things to say about that, right?
Yeah. So this is one of their topics of ideas called OKeyosis, which I believe translates from the Greek to appropriation. And the idea is that you're trying to appropriate into your concern those concerns of others. And so we're taking now the circles that we talked about in Cicero, and Heracles, Stoic philosopher, is taking these concentric circles and say we should constrict or contract these circles into the idea that you should be thinking about even the most far-flung of the rational creatures. And so I love that they use this idea of rational creatures instead of humans, because that it allows us to have a greater quantity of people. Like if there are other intelligent species in the universe, then we can include them, as well as some of our more intelligent non-humanoid Terrans. Say maybe
I was wondering if you were going to go there. That's an interesting thought. Some of the what we often call the higher animals, right?
Right. Your octopi, your dolphins, your maybe apes. Elephants. Yeah, apes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to figure out where we should draw the line for that. I mean, should pigs go in there? They're pretty smart.
Right. Is there a consideration because they're really tasty?
Well, that's
probably not. That does not hold water.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old joke. I forget which comedian brought that up, where he was saying the reason this is a terrible idea, of course. The reason why we eat tuna and we don't eat dolphins is because the dolphins are cute, and by cute he means more than just like looking cute. They do all these cool things. And tuna, if you've ever looked at them, they're not very appealing. So okay to eat them. There might be something to that, but then pick any animal. There's somebody who's found a way to eat it and eat just about every single part of the thing. But in any case, I like that idea of extending the notion of rationality. Maybe elephants are to some degree rational. Maybe octopi is kind of a hard sell, but they're pretty adaptive. They do a lot of problem solving. They seem to have some sort of conception of self. So I don't know. Maybe they are rational. But so now let's talk about another thing with this. You mentioned there's this notion of contracting the circles, and this is a really interesting way to put it, because I think the natural tendency for many of us would be we start with our first circle, that of our parents, children, siblings, friends, and then we would say, oh, we should expand that outwards. Like we all become one big happy family, like they always tell us at work, usually to get more work out of us.
Oh, you're not employees. You're family.
Exactly. Yeah. And family means you can work them however you like and not give them, proper conditions. We could have a whole thing about that. But so normally we think about like extending things outward. I should extend the same, desire for the good of the other. I should extend the same consideration. I should extend the same respect that I have here in this small circle out to bigger circles. So why do you think Heracles says, no, take the big circles and bring them inside, instead of saying like, let's flow this outward? Do you think it's a more effective way of thinking about it, bringing people close into you?
Yeah, and just think about like how you bring people into those closer circles. You have friends and you spend time with them, you bring them closer to you. And so I feel like there's a physical connection of how we create close relationships is to bring them closer to us physically, except for in these times. And
true. Yeah. Like 6 feet away.
Yeah, it's close enough.
Yeah.
And so the metaphor works together easier if we're thinking about bringing people closer together, even though they're not physically connected closer together.
And now Heracles talks about like visualizing this, right? This is a Stoic practice. It's not just an idea. It's something that people would try to do on a daily basis, or perhaps in occasions of stress when they're tempted to think about everybody else as being a bunch of jerks that they shouldn't care about, right?
Right. Yeah, so you'd sit and meditate on this, maybe in the morning or the evening, depending, and just like meditate on the thought of like, who should I be thinking about in the things that I do? My actions have consequences, and I need to be mindful of what those consequences actually do to other people.
Yeah.
I guess regardless of who they are.
Yeah, and it could lead us to thinking about not just negatively, how we can affect them, but what we might do for them as well, what we need to send to them or keep in mind. Who do you want to talk about next? We've got quite a few other.
Yeah, I think we can definitely touch. I don't know. You can either stay in the Western tradition or we can go east.
Let's go east.
Okay, so let's go Buddhism. And Metta Meditation uses a very similar practice, and it's Metta translates as benevolence or loving kindness, and is a similar idea of trying to extend the emotional feeling of loving kindness or benevolence to people that we might not as easily interact with in that same mindset. And so if you can extend this feeling, then it allows us easier to make decisions on them if they're in that like circle that you consider that you can at least feel for.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. If you think about, people often bring up similarities between Stoicism and Buddhism. And we do have this similarity of practices between OKeyosis and Metta Meditation. But I think there's a couple other similarities as well. I think that a lot of people are surprised when they find out that Stoicism thinks that, compassion and affection for others and, reaching out to them would be a good thing, because they view Stoicism as being primarily about like protecting the self and not having emotional attachments. And I think there's a similar thing with Buddhism too. There's sort of like a simplified way of looking at Buddhism that's off base, that views it as, well, just avoid attachments to anything, right? The whole goal is to slip out of that. And yet the largest group of Buddhists, the Mahayana Buddhists, the various schools associated with them, think that this is quite important, and even some Vajrayana Buddhists incorporate this as well. So there's a similar, we could call it, misconception of Buddhism and Stoicism coming in from the outside, and maybe from sketches of them that were not entirely well grounded.
Right. I guess within Stoic circles, there's people that use the distinction little s versus big S Stoic.
Oh, so if
you're talking about the actual Stoic philosophy, use the big S to capitalize it. It's a proper noun. Whereas our little s's, think of Spock from Star Trek.
Yeah.
He's your
unemotional.
Yeah.
Dispassionate.
Purely logical.
Yeah.
Little s Stoic, and it's what is that? A straw Stoic.
Yeah. Do you think you could say something similar with Buddhism? Like, obviously, it's not going to be uppercase and lowercase B Buddhism, but that there's a
it's a trope.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, with the Stoicism thing, what ended up happening was Stoic philosophy, which had been studied for a long time, became connected with intellectual culture, and then people stripped away a lot of the important elements of it and focused primarily on the toughness, the unemotionality, and a few other things, and that became the lowercase s Stoicism that we're talking about here by about the early 19th century, I would say. And so then people start using it with a lowercase s in discussions, just talking about not showing pain as being stoic. I don't know that we have something exactly correlative to that in Buddhism. Another similarity, let me bounce this idea off of you. So you could say that, why should a person do this widening of the circles or contracting of the circles, or trying to think about people that one is not directly connected with as being part of one's circle, and there's answers to it that are what we could call deontological, that is based in duty. You should just do that, that's the right thing to do, right? And you do get that in Buddhism, and you do get that in Stoicism, but you also get what we can call a eudaimonistic, that is oriented towards our own well-being or happiness attitude about it as well. If you're a Stoic, why should you do this? Why should you take on the work of trying to see your neighbors, who are probably kind of a pain to you at times, as being part of your family who you feel affection towards, because it's a good thing for you to do ultimately. It makes you a better person, and not like a better person in the sense that you can lord it over them passive aggressively and say, see how nice I am to you. But it leads you towards what eudaimonia, happiness or fulfillment, or good spirit. Yeah, what that actually is, which is being the kind of person who actually can be benevolent to others. And Buddhism, there's a very different conception of the self, namely that ultimately there is no self at the bottom. So that's different from Stoicism. But it's still good for you to engage in Metta Meditation. Why? Well, tying in with Buddhist metaphysics and reincarnation, it helps you get rid of some of your karma, for one thing. But I think there's also a similar thing. It helps you to feel better in your life. It helps you to flourish in some ways, right? To be connected to other. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's actually lots of research, especially being done now, about how volunteering or giving gifts make you feel, and one of those things that it does is it makes you actually feel better from giving, you and it lasts longer than to buy yourself something. So there's kind of this idea of treat yourself and treat yourself. And I feel like maybe that's maybe a little much. You definitely need to make sure that you are getting enough sleep and maintaining yourself. But from if you're just looking for having a happy life, buying yourself over buying someone else something,
Yeah.
you're probably going to have a more enjoyable life doing the latter.
Now, do you think the motivation of the gift buying and gift giving to another makes a difference in it? So, like, for example,
Minorly.
What's that?
I said minorly.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
if I get you a gift and I'm doing it because I'm hoping to get a gift in return from you, like maintaining that reciprocal relation, or if I'm buying you a gift because I want to show off, or we can think of all sorts of not really on point reasons for buying gifts, as opposed to just wanting something good for you and saying, "Oh wow, this would be really great for Dan. He's been talking about this book that he hasn't been able to get for a long time. Here's a copy. I'm getting this for him." Right? Does the motivation make a difference?
I guess I jumped the gun a little bit because I was first thinking that you were going to say, like, does it matter that I'm going to feel better about this, or if I'm just looking for the other person, which, like, minorly. But if you're doing what you had asked to the does that person, is he trying to show off or something?
Yeah.
I think the motivation, like, really skews it, as well as part of it is that you're trying to elicit some enjoyment in the recipient. And if the recipient despises the thing, then your enjoyment of it decreases. And so if you get something that someone really wants, but you say, like, well, yeah, and I, had to skin 12 monkeys to get it, and all of a sudden you recoil because you think terrible. That is... Yeah, I was like, why?
I had to pull this out of the hands of a homeless person for whom it was the only possession. Yeah, that'd be pretty awful, wouldn't it?
Right. And so now it feels like you've given them, like, this false hope. Now they can't even look at the thing.
You've given them a poisoned gift, right?
Yeah. I don't think that has the same feel, but I can't point to any particular studies that I've read.
Well, we did that entire show a long time ago that people might want to tune into about giving for Riverwest Radio, right? And we explored some of those issues in there, particularly what happens when you give somebody a gift that they really don't want. Mm-hmm. How that sometimes that's worse than giving them nothing. So, well, should we talk about utilitarianism?
Sure.
And we can jump back to, if we have more time, we can jump back to any of the stuff that we didn't get to. So utilitarianism is a philosophy that officially begins in the 18th century with Jeremy Bentham, but the general idea had been around for quite a long time, and you don't just find it in Western philosophy. As a matter of fact, in Chinese philosophy, the Maoist school, who were very influential for a while, but unfortunately died out, they were effectively utilitarians, just in a very different context. And one of the things that Bentham stressed was the importance of what he called benevolence, meaning this disposition to, as he put it, to take pleasure in other people feeling pleasure, because everything for the utilitarians at first was about pleasure and pain. They were hedonists, and so if I give you that gift, and let's not make it a book, let's find something a little bit more relatable for people. What's your favorite food?
Oh,
or something that you'd like to get, say, in the mail.
I really very much enjoy Dragon's Milk out of Left Hand Brewery in Michigan.
Okay. It's kind of beer, right? So
yeah, it's a dark, creamy, delicious porter.
Okay, I can relate to that definitely, because I like that sort of stuff as well. So I order it online, and it arrives at your door, and nobody steals the package, and you get it inside, and it's got a little note, I suppose, or something like that. It says "enjoy." Right now, if I feel neutral about it, that's not benevolence. That's maybe I did it for some other reason. But But if I actually take delight in your delight, that's what Bentham called benevolence. So there's an affective part to it. It's not just the doing, it's the motivation. The opposite of that is malevolence, where I enjoy your pain, or when you actually enjoy something, I feel bad about that because I would prefer you to not feel good about it. And along with benevolence would also be, if you are feeling trouble or pain or something like that, I don't necessarily feel the same thing. It's not like emotional contagion, but I feel bad that you feel bad, right? So Bentham thought that this is a really important motive in human behavior, and he talked about the difference between what he called particular benevolence, which is really easy to feel towards those who we care about, friends, family, maybe our neighbors. And then he talked about universal or general benevolence. And he said that the problem with most people is not that they're not benevolent at all. It's that they're only benevolent with those with whom they've got some sort of connection. And they don't really care about how other people are being affected. And so he wanted to try to promote universal benevolence as how human beings ought to view themselves, comport themselves, the way they ought to behave. And there's a lot of transformations that happen. There's, some other important utilitarian philosophers, John Stuart Mill, well worth reading. He refines it a bit. This guy, Henry Sidgwick, who nobody really reads anymore except us moral philosophers, but it was really worth reading. He does it as well. And then we get down to somebody who's kind of considered to be one of the bad boys of contemporary philosophy by many people, Peter Singer. And I guess, he's considered to be that because he's a consistent utilitarian. And he really does think that the utilitarians think that we ought to take everybody's outcomes into consideration, good or bad, when we're making decisions. Now, he has a book called The Expanded Circle. Expanding
Circle.
Yes. Expanded would be a fait accompli. We finished it. It's a project for the contemporary times. Go ahead.
Yeah. So part of this is, he is trying to make an argument for why we ought to care about all people on the world in this utilitarian idea. And so first he talks about caring for children, and you see a child drowning in a pond, and say the pond is only 3 foot deep, and you have zero chance of having anything harmful happen to you for going in and saving this child, but you have $300 shoes on, or a suit or dress, however you want. And you have zero time to take these things off in order to save them. You will ruin these things, so you are giving up $300 of value in order to save the child. And basically, everyone responds to this with the, well, yeah, of course I'll go and save the child. It's so easy. It's really a almost ingrained reaction. You see a child, you save it. And so the question is, he then poses, once people usually answer in the affirmative, is, okay, well, then will you send a check right now for $300 to save a child on the other side of the world? And all of a sudden, they get in this moral quandary. And it's well, if it only takes $300 to save a child, then why am I not doing that right now?
Yeah. And you can make a stronger argument. You can say, it doesn't even take $300. It could just be $30. It could be $3. Are you willing to do that? And a lot of people are like, I don't know, ask me next week, and then they never get around to it, right? So how does this tie in with expanding circles then? What is the general idea there?
So the general principle here is we are predisposed to caring for those that are closest to us, either relationally or just even physically. And you have lots of experiences of people dropping a hat to go into dangerous situations to save strangers because they're in need at that moment. And so over the course of human history, people have expanded the circles of beings whose interests they're willing to value similar to their own. So this is our talk about our in-groups that we talked about earlier, either packers or motorcyclists or Christians or whatever you want to put into there. And then, altruism. He then argues that altruism, while directed at one small circle of family, tribe, or even nation, is not moral. But it does become moral when it is applied to wider circles, because you are doing a process of generalizing or universalizing this altruistic tendencies. So there's no longer a divide between, oh, I should do good for some people but not for others. If the rule is that you should care for people, then you should care for all people and not just some people. And yeah, please.
We should specify too that when we say that it's not moral, that doesn't mean that it's immoral, right? Mm-hmm. So caring for my neighbor who I've formed this connection with, and they live right down the hall, and maybe walking their dog when they can't walk their dog, that doesn't become a bad act because of that. It just doesn't have the same moral content that doing something for other people who I'm not as close to would have, right?
Right. There's what is it?
Supererogatory.
Oh, yes, there we go. That's the word of the day. Yeah. Supererogatory. So a thing that is good to do, but not bad not to do.
Yeah, and oftentimes, so we're getting into a little bit of technical stuff here, but we sometimes talk about strict and non-strict duties, and the non-strict get called supererogatory, meaning that they go beyond what you can ask for. The rogation is asking, and super is above. So, if I'm saving the child, all I got to do is save the kid, right? And then maybe give them mouth-to-mouth if that's necessary, or CPR if I'm qualified to do that. I don't have to necessarily buy them a new set of clothes because their clothes are wet. That would be supererogatory.
Yeah, be nice.
Yeah, or take them for ice cream. That's not necessary, but it would be a nice thing to do. We should probably get to talking about our...
right before that, I just want to finish up the thing, because the last part of this book is why there's usually this idea, or this he kind of sets up as a bit of a dichotomy, or an old dichotomy that he's trying to break, of the rational reasons for caring versus emotional reasons for caring, and he says that these aren't actually in conflict for us. It's our emotional reasons which give us this idea that we should care for each other, and it is a reason that allows us to rise above our base level of concern and extend that emotional caring and instinctive caring to a larger group of people.
So ideally, we wouldn't have to choose between emotion and reason. Those would be integrated with each other in our response. They would play off of each other, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I think that's a very attractive way to look at it. And going back to thinking about the Stoics, I think that's perfectly in line with their point of view on that as well.
So he's kind of fusing, I guess, Kant and Hume here.
Yeah. Well, he's overcoming Hume, right? Hume, reason can only be the slave of the passions. Mm-hmm. And Kant was a little bit, actually, I won't say a little bit, Kant was far too rationalistic.
Yeah.
The passions, have no effective role in morality for Kant. So, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And that's consistent with the other utilitarians as well. Mm-hmm. So, we're getting a little bit short on time. Do we want to skip over the question and spend a bit more time on the practice this time around? What do you think?
I think we can spend just 4 minutes on the question.
Okay. So, one of the things that comes up whenever people talk about this, these circles, especially for us Americans, is shouldn't we care more about our country? After all, America is supposed to be this wonderful beacon, a city on a hill, as one of the Puritans put it. Although, of course, that came with responsibilities that many people overlook in that sermon from John Winthrop. So do we have an obligation to care mostly about our country, sort of like what Cicero was saying, or should we care about people more? people both in the wider circle outside of our country, outside of our large in-group, and people within the country. And there's a lot of ways we can approach this, I think. What are your thoughts, Dan?
It's a really big question, and there's the distinction between like what is my nation? Is my nation my our cultural ties? Is it like the political structure? Is it a national identity, or is it something a little bit more strong like nationalism? And where do these things lead us down some negative paths?
Yeah, and I think that one aspect of the way Americans look at things, what's often called exceptionalism, has not been very good for us in the long run. There are some ways in which we can say we've excelled. And I'm not just thinking about outproducing people or stuff like that. I'm thinking about some times and places where we've done really good work. And but there is a tendency to say, USA over everything. And then it's not really much different than someone in some other country saying, my country is the best, my people right or wrong, get out of our way. And we don't have much recourse when other people say those sorts of things, other than to say, well, we're tougher and stronger and have more money right now. That won't last forever, though. And one of the things, and I was talking with you about this earlier, there's a song by the composer Jan Sibelius, which has become the Finnish national anthem, and it's a really wonderful song that I like quite a bit, in part because I won't read the actual lyrics here, but he talks about how great his nation is, how wonderful its skies are bluer than the ocean, and it's just as good as it can possibly get. But then he says, at each time that he brings that up, but other people love their country just as much as I do. Their countries are good as well. And I think that there can be a recognition of the importance of the homeland, what in Latin they call the patria, the mother country or fatherland or whatever you want to call it, that gives it its right value without denigrating everybody else. And maybe that's where it goes wrong. When it's USA is the best because we beat the Russians at hockey, or although the Miracle on Ice was pretty cool, I have to admit, having seen it. But when it becomes about denigrating others and asserting power over them and exploiting them, that's when it goes wrong, right? And maybe we can say this not just about nationalism, we could say this about families. If I prioritize my own family to the detriment of the other families in my neighborhood, something is going wrong there, right?
Right. I feel like this brings up that, zero-sum versus positive-sum games, once again, that we've spoken about a couple times here. And just the idea that if you're thinking of nations as a zero-sum game, then my nation's gain can only come at your nation's detriment. And to think of it as a more positive-sum game, that we can both have and build better nations, and it doesn't mean that your nation has to, suffer in order for us to be good.
Yeah. And maybe the jockeying for position in that way comes from an emphasis on the wrong kinds of goods that aren't, totally without value, but think about honor, for example, or we could say call social status. Now think about it between countries. If one country is taking more than its fair share of that, then everybody else has to have less. And why would they be tempted to do that? Because they're all about that. You think about the prickliness of certain countries that are quite insecure about their own value, and they have to jockey with other countries. And again, we could say this about neighborhoods. We could say this about cities, we could say this about families. Yeah.
New York and Boston.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, and we have our own rivalry here, right, with
Yeah.
Milwaukee and
Yeah.
Chicago. So,
But I think we should move on to practice here in order to get through it.
and not tick off any Chicago people because, we
Oh, yeah.
obviously take Milwaukee's side.
We can build a better world together. So our practice here is going to be Metta Meditation that we spoke on just a little bit, and it comes from the Buddhist tradition. And so the practice, as I spoke about earlier, is the idea of bringing to mind someone that you have zero difficulty in like feeling love for, and like maybe it's a parent or a spouse or a child, and someone that like you think about, and it's like immediately it's just like flowers and rainbows or whatever you want to say. Every there's always a little bit of tarnish, but it's easy to love them regardless. And to take this and like try to cultivate that feeling, to like really elicit that in your mind's eye, and then you start to think about other ones, people that are neutral to you, and you try to maintain the same level of love, this emotional feeling of love, and you try to just associate it with these neutral ones, and then you do it for those people who are difficult, those people that that are
Get on your
rude
nerves,
or
right?
annoying, busybodied, arrogant, self-righteous, viceful, neglectful, war profiteers, fence-sitters, naysayers, charlatans, those who are unkind, accusers and rebukers, liars, and those that are just unhappy. And you want to try to still elicit this feeling, and depending upon how you're feeling with you also want to think about you in this point, because sometimes it's hard to feel love for ourselves, and this is a good practice to encourage ourselves to have a little bit more, I guess, self-esteem, to love each other, to be more accepting of ourselves in this moment. And
so
then
let me ask then, how does one hold on to that feeling, and you might say transfer it to these people that you don't normally feel that feeling towards? A lot of people would say, I can't change my feelings, but is it possible to do that?
Well, it seems like, from at least my personal experience and from the writings I've read about this, is that emotions linger, and if you can elicit an emotion of something that's really loving, then it's going to linger, and you're not going to immediately turn to anger when you're talking to someone who is really negative around you, that you will actually still have that positive experience. And are you still there?
I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, you've moved. Okay. And the last thing is to try to expand this feeling to all beings, rational beings or humans, whoever you're going to cut the line for.
Yeah. So I imagine this takes a lot of practice to do well, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it took 3 or 4 times me doing this to like start getting it to like feel like it's having a little bit of effect. It's going to take more to think of that person that you've hated since you were 6.
Yeah.
And now, go like, oh yeah, like that guy, he's great. Yeah. You might not even say he's great, but like at least you're not feeling that immediate negative reaction to even thinking about this person.
So it's affective and it's also cognitive, but it wouldn't result in you going out and like seeking them out and doing something to improve their lives, right? Or could it encompass that or lead to that sort of thing?
I think it could definitely lead to it if you are removing your negative affect towards someone to at least to a neutral thing. You're no longer avoiding the person even in the first place. If you really dislike someone, then you're like, oh, that person's here, I'm getting the heck out of here.
Yeah. Well, that's you. I'd have to watch the reaction of like going up to them and starting a conflict myself, because I'm a bit more thumatic in that respect. That is driven by that part of ourselves that tends to seek out conflict that way. Now, you mentioned you can apply this to yourself as you're doing it. So would you, a lot of us like ourselves too much, you might say, but maybe there's parts of ourselves that we don't like. We recognize ourselves as being among the difficult people, not necessarily to ourselves, although we often do get in our own way, but to other people. So how does Metta Meditation apply that? You then turn that affection or love towards the bad part of yourself that you recognize as problematic?
Yeah, so like for example, you see that you're not good at something, and you hold that as a something that you would really like to improve upon, but like maybe you're just not a natural basketball player, but all of your friends love to play basketball, and so you go and play basketball with them, but you really stink at playing basketball, and so you feel bad that you can't participate fully with these people that you care about. And it's kind of like this idea of forgiving yourself and still feeling love at yourself, even though that you failed at certain things. That that failure isn't like the only thing that matters about you.
That's interesting. I mean, going back to the Stoics and talking about connections between these. So the Stoic concentric circles things doesn't have that, but Stoicism in other parts does have that forgiveness of self and not letting yourself off the hook for the problematic aspects, but also recognizing that you can change them, that maybe they're not as bad as you think. The only really bad thing is being a vicious person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, the Buddhists don't quite use the terminology of virtuous and vicious there.
Yeah.
In that exact sense. But yeah. So, and just to, back this up, with, besides a couple thousand years of Buddhist practice, there's actually been quite a number of studies, and one of them is a meta study of the effects of loving kindness meditation on positive emotions, a meta-analytic review by Professor Zheng from the Hong Kong University, and their findings this was a 2015 study, and their findings were that from a medium-sized improvement to daily positive emotion with meditation on a loving kindness aspect of metta. And this is having a greater effect than practices with focus on just compassion. And so the length of this meditation did not affect the magnitude of the positive impact. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of time
but you
on
do have
this.
to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, any final thoughts before we
got a couple of books here really quick.
Yeah, so Cicero's On Duties, which you can find easily online, is a great place to look. You'd want to look in book 1. Peter Singer, we mentioned already, The Expanding Circle, really great book. You can get Heracles, the translations of his stuff, in a book called Heracles the Stoic. Any particularly good thing on metta meditation that you can think of?
Not offhand, unfortunately.
Okay.
That study, maybe. And so we'll close out here with an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone.